Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today we are talking about Redshift Proxies. Proxies are an incredibly efficient way to manage high-density geometry in multiple instances. In part 1, our contributor Theo Daley will walk you through how to set up a proxy, and then later show you a practical example on how he made the cover page. So let's jump in and see what it's all about.
So the quick answer is RS Proxies is the way that you're allowed to have complex geometry only be updated at render time. That way your viewport is very quick and you can still update and change and light and do as you needed. And really it was only going to really be affected by anything at render time. It's the way that Redshift is able to have tens of thousands or millions of instances of objects within your scene, and with C4D you integrate that with the matrix object, and basically the sky's the limit and how many instances you want of anything in your scene, as long as it's being loaded up, through a Redshift proxy. So how do you actually make an RS proxy? It's actually really simple. All you have to do is, once you have your object set up and you like how it looks, just select it and go to File, Export, Redshift Proxy. A pop-up will come up, and essentially in here you can just leave it all as default, but export, you want to have your selected objects. There's also the option for all objects. You can put your lights in there. Don't worry about connectivity or compressed data. You don't need those really. Scale, you just leave it as normal scale. Proxy origin is world origin, and you really want to keep this that way, but you also have object bounds. The reason being is when you start to instance these, you want it to come in at the scene origin, so you can, when you instance it, it goes all over the place properly. If it's offset, it will look offset. So just remember that. Add proxy to scene, I'm going to leave that on. So once I save this, it will bring it back in. The prefix, I'm just going to leave it RS proxy. I'm not going to remove it from the scene. Otherwise, this would just disappear once I'm done. AOVs, I'm just going to leave it off, but you could put it on if you wanted to, if you needed to. The animation, there's no animation on this, so it's going to be a current frame, but if you did, you could say all frames, or you could say manual and set it up, and also put your frames steps. So let's put that to current frame, say OK. And I just like to keep them the same name, so I'm going to just keep that the same name, and find Scott's field 2 static, and say OK. I'm going to save. And then once that's saved onto disk, it's going to come in. There it is right there. So it just brought it in right on top, and I'm just going to turn these off just to prove the point that it's really in there. And say I turn this proxy off, there'll be nothing in the scene now really to see except for this plane. It's just got to update. So I'm just going to show, there it is. So what if you already have a proxy and you wanted to bring it in and you weren't making a proxy? Well, the thing that you're going to have to do is pretty simple. So I'm just going to delete this and go up to Redshift Objects, and then you're going to have Redshift Proxy. So once you do that, it's blank, and it's just like an image texture type of thing, like it's looking for the path. So all you have to do is find the path of the object, and I'm just going right back to it, and it was this 2 static. And I'm going to say open, and it's going to load it in, and it loads up the materials and textures, and it's going to say show bounding box with check mark. So that's what this is right here, and there it is right there. So there you have it. That's your proxy. So if that's all you needed to do, you're pretty much good to go. Now the next thing would be, well, what if you wanted to actually see it in the scene? Well, you could go mesh, and you'll see 100%, 1-to-1 basically. The thing is that if you start to have, 10 million of these in the scene, it's going to really slow down because of this. So what you'd want to do is preview percentage, maybe go down to 1%. And you can see it's still a fairly accurate representation. What I like to do is leave it either on bounding box, so it's like a solid object in the scene, or I like to keep it off, and then you just have sort of this outline. If you turn off show bounding box, you have nothing in the scene, so you won't know where it is. The other thing here is materials from. Right now it's reading the proxy file. All the materials, all the shaders, everything you do will get packaged into that proxy. But if you're like, hey, I want to make this whole thing gold because I like gold, well, you normally bring in your texture, you put it on top. I've just set it up as gold, and you're like, how come it's not working? It's not updating. Nothing's happening. Well, that's because the proxy is explicitly saying take it from the file, ignore anything else. If you just switch this to object, and then I'm just going to refresh, it will now know that, hey, take it from the object itself. You've put something on that object, so now read it from there. So now this whole thing will be your nice gold, and you're happy and good to go, and you can make a gold forest. Now, if I switch this back to proxy, it's going to ignore this object. I mean, ignore this material because it's looking at it purely from what's inside the proxy, not what's on the object. So I'm just going to delete that. The other option you have is scene match by name and prefix. So there's two ways to look at this. If you just click it, it'll give you this prefix. Now it's blank. What it's doing is essentially saying, hey, in this proxy, there's all these materials that you have, and there's all these names on these materials. Use these if they still exist in the scene. So since I just made it from the scene, these already exist. So I already have, this material. And say I wanted to change just one portion of it. I've already set up this absolute color. That way I just switch this and just let it update. You can see it's already updated right there. So it knows, like, hey, this is the exact same file name as one of the materials. So just use that. I'm just going to switch that back. Now you might be like, well, I don't want to use the materials in there. I want to make a new one. So what you could do is say, let's just say update underscore. So now that will say, hey, any material in here that has update underscore and matches the explicit names that are in the proxy, read that instead. So right now, update underscore, I've already made one here, update underscore, which is just a duplicate of this needle. All I did was rename it update underscore. So if I select that one, I have this blue. So if I just take this blue and put it on the diffuse, just give it a second to update, because it understands, okay, I've got this update underscore and match the exact name. It will read from there. And there you go. So now it's using that texture as opposed to anything else. And that's how you would basically change any material within your proxy. You have this other tab for animation, and basically you turn that on to your simple, your loop, your ping pong, and you'd set detect the frames, but because this is just one still frame, it doesn't matter in this instance. Below here you have these overrides, so you could override the object ID and then give it an actual tag and give it an ID, tessellation, displacement, visibility, user data, all of that's in here as well. So essentially that would be the way that you would update and create your proxy. Now the other thing that you'd want to do perhaps is say like, well, I just have this one object, but I want to have a whole bunch of them. So what you would do is go object, matrix scatter, and it creates this RS matrix with a tag already. And what you would do is under particles, instead of saying optimize spheres, you could say custom objects and drag your proxy into there. Now it's going to say sequential, but you could do random. You could do a scale multiplier. Say I said 0.5. And you can already see it's already made quite a few of them. And matrices or matrices are the way that you'd use it in Redshift and C4D. You don't use the cloner. It's just a lot faster this way. So right now it's using 40 by 40, and it's using this distance. So let's just make it 20 by 20. And let's do, I don't know, 40, 40. Just to see if that's not nearly enough. So let's do 500, 500. And there we go. That's sort of the way that you're able to instance a whole bunch of objects in your scene. And you can see my viewport is still, quite performance-wise really, really well done. And you have it, and you can still use any of your effectors that you'd like. So if I wanted to use a shader effector, because remember your matrix will still have your effectors, and then you can put anything you want to do in here. It could be your shader, so that, but let's do noise, do 50, let's do 5,000. And in the effector, let's do the scale. -1 rather. And you can see that it's taking on basically the settings from that. So some of them are bigger, some of them smaller. I could make that noise a bit more extreme. Let's just do 350. Up the contrast. So now it's taking on all of those. And again, this proxy, because I've set it to use the update, if I just turn that off and go back to the proxy, and I can leave it at scene on, but I'll just put the proxy file. And there you go. That's the way that you can create, instances of your object very quickly. You can change the textures, and, in this tag right here, like I put it to 1.5, but you could put it to 2. And you can see it just updated instantly, and there you have it. And, it isn't relegated to just one proxy. You could just have multiple proxies of stuff, and then you could have a whole scene of various different trees or buildings or cars or anything you could possibly think of in the scene. And there you go. Okay, so say you have your proxy and you wanted to actually put it onto a surface. How do you actually go about doing that? So we have this surface that's, being displaced. Let's go back to the height. I'll make it 550, just to really have a big difference between. So there we go. So you have our surface, and now we want to put stuff onto the surface. So best bet is to, make a current state object. And I'm just going to hide the original. I just like to keep the originals there. So you have your object now. So what you could do is, your standard way of, picking in, that certain area, and you're good to go. And then you could make this a selection. So you could set this as a selection. So now you have a selection tag. So you have that. That's one way of setting up free. The other way is to go and to be in here and set a vertex weight and have it to 0. And now you have the option of, painting. Oh, sorry. Let's go a little wider. Deselect and double click it. And now you have the option of painting, which will allow you to, hold shift and feather things. So you're able to have fall off to certain sections. So let's just do there, there, and there, just to make it really obvious what's going to happen next. Okay. So now you have that set as a vertex map. And on the vertex map, I just clicked once. I'm just going to call this selection for trees. Okay. So we have that now. And we have our proxy. So what you'd want to do is you either go to your Redshift objects matrix scatter, or you can create a matrix scatter and add that tag. And in here, you're going to have in particles the mode, which is saying optimize spheres. I'm going to say custom objects, and literally just going to drag my proxy into there. It's going to have distribution sequential. I'm just going to put random, even though I have one object. If I had multiples, then it would at least randomize it. You have your scale, and you have a seed. And on the matrix object itself, as you can see, it's immediately already created a whole bunch of them for me. And it's going 40 by 40. So say I went 4,000 by 300. You can see it's created all of these proxies and it's loaded up no problem. But I want to use this actual surface. So what I need to do is, instead of grid array, I'd pick object. And it's asking for an object, which is my plane that's collapsed. And it's aligning it to the surface. So you can see it's using this object and tying them to that. Why are they sideways? Because of this align clone. If I uncheck that, you can see they all now will be upright. So that looks well and good, and it's giving me a count of 20. Let's do a count of 2,000. So you can see I now have 2,000 of those trees that would normally bog this down and probably freeze my computer, and they're just working totally fine. But what about those selections I made? Like, why aren't those being used? Well, you can see here under the surface, you have the option of using that selection, that first one. So I could use the point selection. And you can see it's picking those. That's perfectly fine. And then you can also, if you wanted to, instead of using the point selection, you could use this vertex selection. So if I was to go that and pick trees, you're going to see nothing happened. And you're like, why did that happen? Well, a vertex map is very different than a selection set. So the way you go about that is you'd pick your RS matrix object and you'd go to your effectors. I'm going to use a plane effector. And in your effectors, you make sure it's there. In here, you would go into your fall offs. And this is where you can then drag your vertex. So you can see it says trees. And now it's using it, but the plane effector isn't saying what to do. It's just, hey, use your position. So if I turn that off, I use scale, I'm going to set to uniform -1, you will see it's adhering to those, the vertex map. And because there's the feather, the shift, you're going to get certain areas are going to be smaller trees, and then it's going to go up to the larger trees. And that's all based on this. So you can see it's using this as, hey, keep away from those areas. If you wanted to use those areas, you can go into your fall off, and there should be an invert. And there you go. And that's how you basically are able to do this. And the beauty of this method is, you see as I paint, it updates immediately. And I was like, feather, it updates immediately. So this is the way I think is great for you to tailor make things. And you could add a noise instead, and it would adhere to the noise, and you can have something animated as a texture and use that. So that's the way that you can easily scatter. And remember, with the Redshift object tag set to particles, you can put as many different proxies as you wanted to, and it would instance and randomize, and you could scale them up here and have a different seed, and you'd have all these different objects. So yeah, so let's just start breaking down this scene, and I'll sort of show you how I built it, and just sort of some of the thinking I had behind this, and just go from there. So the biggest thing was start with really big shapes, and then just build up there, and then use proxies as you see fit. So first, I just have a plane with a displacer on it, with some noise, just blister turbulence. It's not not crazy, it's 200 segments. Put that on, and it gave you sort of this craggly rock feel. and then collapsed that and made a duplicate, put that in the background, just scaled it up. So I have 2 of them now. And the front one, which was going to be sort of our focus, is going to be the one where it has all the, information on it. So this is where I'm going to have, my vertex maps painted. And I just have a few different ones so I could scatter different things different places. I'll just randomly place there. And then from there, that's when I start to add the scatters. So I have these grass elements that essentially have quite a few. It's, I think, in total 400,000 or so. Or, sorry, no, more like 750,000. So, in the viewport, it can sort of stutter a bit. But the biggest point of that is, like, say, divide that by 10 and divide this one by 10. It can be chopped down and performance is quite good. Again, I'm setting this up, laying it out, and sort of testing each element one at a time. And then once I'm happy with it, I start to increase the count. So from there, I have, my plants and my rocks and my trees. So I'll just put on those elements just so you can get a sense of what those are doing. And then, the biggest thing is with the trees, they're using the soil. And then I have selection sets based on the different tags, selection tags. And those are just using the custom proxies that are just set to random. And that's about it. So, if I turn these on, you'll see that in a second, this will be quite a dense place. So what I like to do is try to keep the counts down. Normally work with multiples of 10. It seems the easiest thing to do. And then from there, just sort of up them once I sort of know what I want to do and play with the seeds and stuff like that. We get a sort of different look. And then all the matrices are sort of tied to different effectors that sort of help give, random placements to things. And, there's using linear fields, and some of them are using the vertex maps that I painted. So that way they can be fed in and, inverted and played around with. So I'll just wait till this sort of initializes and we'll just sort of take a look at that, and it should be in 1 second. So there you go. So again, you can see it's really not that crazy. Just a few trees in there, give you the sense of things. And then when I want to look through my camera, I can give it a little test, see sort of how things are working. If I want more depth and space, that's when I'd sort of approach it. And then just, like I said, I was working with multiples of 10, so now I could just multiply by 10, sort of see what happens with these smaller trees that are around here, and everything's real world scale. So if you were to put a little person in here, they would be, the accurate height. So the trees are all working with that. I think that's really important. And I'm just going to multiply this by 10. And then you just sort of build up your scene that way. And, as I said, like now you can see it's pretty dense. Just wait until it, cleans up a bit more so we get a better sense of what's happening with the shadows, sort of where things are. And then once that feels good, just go through the camera and put your hero elements in there, which are, for me, is just a stump and then some few butterflies I found, and just download it for free and placed in here. And then once it's cleaned up, I feel like I have a sort of good composition. Then I have a environment that just has a slight tint of yellowish and a phase, so it pushes forward just ever so slightly, and then sort of go from there. And you can see already you're getting the God rays and things like that from the light, because the light has a slight contribution. So the ray contribution is just very, very, very subtle, but that's giving you more than enough. And already you can sort of see the dap of lighting and sort of that. And then right now you can say, well, it's too scraggly rock on the surface, so let's just bump up the grass. So I'm going to multiply that by 10. And just give it a second again, and that's pretty much it. It's once you have those vertex maps and you have your elements all prepped, it's more about just scattering things and then just sort of playing with seeds and the counts and making sure that your composition is very interesting or dynamic or calm, and just go from there. So that's pretty much it. So as you can see, like, it doesn't take all that much work once you have all your stuff prepped, and especially with RS proxies, you can just have your own library just sitting on disk, and then at any time you just bring them in and you're good to go. So I hope this gives you sort of an idea of how powerful proxies are, and you could be using buildings, it could be animated elements, your whole scene could be proxied, and then after that, you just have your character in the scene running around, and the scene will be very light, very easy to work with, and yeah, that's about it. So this opens up your mind to a way of integrating proxies into your just standard workflow.